Israel indicates phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire is imminent. But what did Palestinians get from phase 1? Hundreds more Gazans were killed in violation of the agreement, while humanitarian aid remains insufficient at best. Still, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the ceasefire is ready to progress toward disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza within Israel's yellow lines. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the Gaza ceasefire. Contingent on the return of one final hostage's remains, Israel says the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire will be complete. But for many Gazans, phase 1 has simply meant less gunfire and aerial bombing, not actual peace. Their suffering continues, and so do fears that Israel will further cement its elimination of their territory by using the ceasefire to draw new illegal borders, which Israel labels yellow lines. Also, the next phase of the plan involves disarming Hamas. But can that be done without annihilating Palestinians' right to resist? Here's a look.
Hamas and the Red Cross are still searching for the last remaining deceased hostage in Gaza. The return of Israeli officer Ran Gvili's remains would mark the end of the first phase of the ceasefire deal that took effect 2 months ago. But the next phase is still far from certain. It should see further Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, disarmament of Hamas, deployment of an international stabilisation force, and creation of a multinational board of peace to oversee the strip. All of these points are still contentious, and Israeli violations are casting a shadow over any potential progress. Palestinian authorities say Israel has breached the truce more than 700 times, killing at least 377 Palestinians.
There is no safety here. There is no consideration for the ceasefire. The war is still going on. People are bombed every day in their homes.
Hamas officials have warned if this continues, the deal cannot move forward. The Palestinian group has also said it is open to discuss giving up arms if the talks offer a credible path to a Palestinian state.
But if not, okay, we are ready to discuss the idea of storing or freezing based on a total security arrangements, first of all, which keep the capability of Palestinians to defend themselves in case they are attacked.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the second phase is close and that he will discuss the details with US President Donald Trump later this month. But the army chief Eyal Zamir sparked controversy when he called the current Israeli position in Gaza, known as the Yellow Line, the new border. The UN quickly pushed back.
That seems to me to go against the spirit and the letter of the Trump peace plan, and we firmly stand against any change of the borders of Gaza and Israel.
That yellow line still allows Israel to occupy more than half of Gaza. In what remains, Palestinian suffering continues. Most of the population is still homeless and living in makeshift shelters. Israel has allowed more aid in, but it is nowhere near what was agreed and what people desperately need. So far this month, an average of 140 trucks have crossed into the enclave, but the target was 600. According to UNICEF, in October, more than 9,000 children were hospitalized for acute malnutrition.
It's still a shockingly high number. In terms of how many of those children were acutely malnourished, all of them. This is all for children with acute malnutrition. Mothers cannot afford to buy their children the nutritious food that's available in the markets. Fruits and vegetables, which are now here, remain very expensive.
The first phase has brought little relief to Gazans who endured 2 years of brutal war. What comes next could put Palestinians in an endless state of fear and pain.
So joining me now to discuss what's next for the ceasefire are from London, author, historian, and professorial research associate at SOAS, Chaim Breshith, and from Exeter, journalist Jehan Al-Farra. Thanks both so much for being with me. Jehan, I'll begin with you. As a Gazan, please reflect on what phase one, almost complete now according to Israel, has meant to Palestinians so far.
Well, on paper, there has been a lull. But in reality, the situation in Gaza remains dangerously fragile. You know, the humanitarian needs still outpace what tiny trickles of aid can manage. Displacement is rampant. Infrastructure lies in ruins, and services that should be basic, you know, water, sanitation, healthcare, they are barely available, and they're under immense strain. A genuine long-term ceasefire isn't just about bombings being quiet for a few weeks. And I say quiet, I mean, shy of 100 Palestinians now have been killed since the ceasefire took effect in October. But there still needs to be agreement on so many things, you know, on governance, security, reconstruction. Nothing is yet clear. Tony Blair was just dropped from this so-called Board of Peace. But that is not enough, you know, removing one controversial figure does little, if anything, when the entire governance model is still, you know, set to be detached.
Before you go further, though, I'd like to talk more about that, whatever structure might be constructed for that international body that's been talked about. I think you said shy of 100 Palestinians have been killed. It's actually shy of 400, exactly.
300, yes,
yeah,
377
or so by last count. But Jehan, do you consider any of this progress, at least, even if it is minimal, is at least momentum forward?
Of course, it is welcome that, you know, the bombings has decreased, obviously, exponentially. But as I said, for everyone who's survived in Gaza so far, the humanitarian crisis continues. It continues to unfold behind sealed borders. We've seen reports of Israel wanting to open the Rafah crossing one way only to try and encourage people to leave Gaza, what they call voluntary departure or voluntary migration. Yesterday, the Israeli Supreme Court again extended the ban on independent international reporters actually entering Gaza. And every time they do this, they're hoping that the picture of what's happening on the ground gets a little foggier for the rest of the world, and that the world will just move on. And you have to really ask at this point, will foreign journalists ever actually get into Gaza again to actually show what's happening on the ground? There was a hearing in the Supreme Court on a petition from the Foreign Press Association. They've been trying to get access for quite some time, and this is the 9th delay, 9 postponements. The FBA is now openly calling this, you know, beyond absurd.
Let me just turn to Chaim then and ask you, who has won what here in this process so far? I mean, has Israel effectively then now been able to really cement its acquisition of Palestinian land, as you always said was most of the intention from the outset?
Of course it has. There's no doubt about it. The Palestinians were not candidates to win anything, and they didn't win anything. They didn't win undisturbed opening of the crossing, undisturbed movement of aid, the beginning of the Israeli IDF leaving Gaza, or any other freedoms that they had before, which were not many anyway. The food is insufficient, water is unsafe, electricity is non-existent, the medical institutions are in tatters. We can see what Gaza looks like and feels like. Now, interestingly, Jehan, you said that you spoke about the Supreme Court in Israel and stopping the journalists. Actually, this morning, British and other international journalists from the States and Canada have actually visited Gaza, but not the people of Gaza. They were there serving the Israeli Hasbara by doing an IDF tour of a Hamas tunnel. This is kind of stuff that professional journalists should never do. Instead of demanding to be able to speak to those people we see on the screen who are sitting there on the rubble and trying to survive, they actually do a guided tour by the IDF so that they can speak about Hamas. You can hear from them that it is Hamas that destroyed Gaza. I mean, this is kind of shameful that professional journalists have fallen into this trap. Instead of speaking to people and finding out how they actually managed to live and in the face of disease spreading, in the face of problems of hygiene, in the face of nowhere to actually shelter from the rain and wind and so on. In what was a very difficult beginning of the winter, they are doing a guided tour. This is terrible.
Yeah. You know, Jehan, as well, I mean, we now have Hamas just saying it wants more international pressure placed on Israel before moving on to this phase two. But Israel seems to be on its way regardless of what the reality is, what Hamas would ask for. So is this just becoming a one-sided agreement, if we can call it an agreement? It's just Israeli policy now enforced through a framework that's been provided mostly by the United States?
Yes, I think that is pretty accurate to say. I don't think Israel cares. This, for instance, this yellow line that has split Gaza east and west, Israeli troops withdrew and positioned themselves in east of this yellow line, which is currently, marked by yellow blocks that Israeli forces have placed across the territory. Now, the area, the eastern part of the strip, includes all of the agricultural land. It's basically, on paper, the reconstruction of Gaza was envisaged to begin in this eastern side under the supervision of an international security force. But Israel's military chief has now described this yellow line as a new border for Israel moving forward. Now, his statement is highly alarming and, of course, contradicts the ceasefire agreement, according to which Israel is not meant to occupy or annex Gaza, but rather commit to progressively handing over that territory to an international force and eventually fully withdraw. But of course, we don't see that happening on the ground. We see that Israel acts as Israel wants. And as Haim was just saying, what's more interesting, actually, in Yadaat Ahronot, there was the Israeli paper, there was just a piece published. And in the piece, it said that if global media enters Gaza, Israeli officials will prepare for what they describe as an oncoming wave of negative reports or human stories, focusing on human stories from Gaza. Imagine that they're literally bracing for the world to witness the suffering of the people in Gaza through the eyes of reports and foreign journalists. And of course, no independent international media has been allowed into Gaza since October 2023. The only access they have had is what Haim was just talking about. This it's not access at all, really. It's these sparse, tightly choreographed military escorts that last a couple of hours tops on the Israeli-controlled side, with every stop, mapped out by the army beforehand. They aren't permitted to speak to any Palestinians. They can't go in independently. any photos or videos that they capture has to be shown to the army before publication. You know, there was a France 24 correspondent that just literally called it theater, pantomime. They said it wasn't journalism. And the same journalist describing the yellow line, it said that this yellow line doesn't actually exist. It's more of a kind of rhetorical tool that kind of paints an image of structure.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that yellow line in just a second. Just one final point then on the agreement itself for Haim. Will this agreement, Haim, hit a point where it just can't go any further because the violations cannot be ignored, and will it become then completely clear that there is really no structure in place for Palestinians to live in any way as a sovereign people?
Well, you see, Andrea, you are reporting about what Israel is doing, but the mainstream media in the West doesn't. So what this agreement has been designed to do is to actually block the interest and the coverage of mainstream media about what Israel is doing in Gaza. And in that, it has succeeded. The whole issue of Gaza and the people of Gaza has disappeared since the beginning of the ceasefire. There's no problem. There is a ceasefire. The fact that there is no ceasefire is not covered on the BBC, is not covered by the New York Times, it's not covered by hardly any mainstream media in the West. It's only covered outside the West. So I think, thank you for covering it, and thank you for speaking about it and inquiring about it, because this is what we now need to do. In the absence of this coverage, Israel is doing what they want, as Jihan just pointed out. They now should start leaving, and they are telling the world, even this morning, that they have no plans of vacating Gaza, as the agreement that was signed between Trump and Netanyahu, really, because they are the people that worded it. This is just their interest. No Palestinians were involved. Palestinians needn't be involved in an agreement about Gaza, of course, like anywhere else.
And that's
so
what's...
I don't see.
Yeah, but still, some kind of, you can call it farcical, but some kind of process is moving forward, and Israel is now saying that the next steps are disarming Hamas and demilitarizing the Strip. So what will come of that? Because that is personally my fear for when armed conflict could possibly start again, because trying to force the disarmament of Hamas would mean denying the right of resistance for Palestinians in general.
Exactly.
Is that what you fear too, then? Do you feel armed conflict will have to break out again if this is the direction that Israel is insisting on?
Well, why disarm Hamas? It's not Hamas that killed more than 100,000 Palestinians. It's the Israelis. Did anyone ever think about the necessity, the urgent necessity of disarming the IDF instead? That would bring some break in the murder and mayhem. It is the IDF that is actually turning the Middle East, not just Gaza, the rest of Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, hopefully not Iran, but they plan to do so. Iraq, they're involved in East Africa. They're turning the whole Middle East into a bloodbath, and the solution supposedly is disarming Hamas. Hamas is resisting what Israel is doing. That's all they're doing. And if there is a right of self-defense, why is it denied to the Palestinians?
And Jehan, I wonder if you see that as, a breaking point in the potentially near future, those efforts that Israel will undoubtedly make to disarm Hamas in whatever form, and as many see it, effectively try to end the right of resistance, as Haim seems to think they have an absolute right to maintain those arms, to fight for their rights and against an illegal occupation. Do you see as well the potential for full armed conflict starting again?
I think this ceasefire agreement, which was billed as a sort of Gaza peace plan, was set up to fail from the get-go. Like I said when we first spoke after it took effect, it's obviously welcome that we see some respite for Palestinians, but the way this whole thing was structured, I mean, it doesn't even involve Palestinians in the ruling of Gaza in this so-called board of peace. It seems more of a kind of a colonial style oversight where Palestinians are not involved in their own future, really. So I feel like it was set up to fail from the get-go. Hamas has, the whole time they maintain that they will not disarm, even as they signed the agreement. So yeah. It's still, things are not clear. There is no clear mechanism or time frame for a lot of the things that are meant to take
So Jehan,
place.
if you believe it was set up to fail, was this what we're seeing now, the falling apart of this Gaza peace board and the role of Tony Blair, who was the only one that was outright named to be heading up a lot of the processes as a figurehead? Do you see his, suddenly being taken out of it, proof that it was never meant to even be constructed properly?
I mean, I hope I am wrong, because, things are already bleak. And every time I think more and more about it, it appears even more bleak. So I hope I am wrong, but I don't see good faith, whether it's from the Israeli side or from the American side, good faith moving forward on this and really putting the interest of Palestinians in front of them at all, to be honest. And we saw this like with the announcement about Rafah. We saw that Israel wants to open Rafah one way only, exit only. And I think that alone can tell you all you need to know. So combine that with this recent statement about using the Yellow Line as a new border, meaning that they will take more than half of the territory of Gaza.
But Jehan, do you think that appointing the right international panel could perhaps save this process? Are there figures on the international stage that could help make this work? And could President Trump fairly serve as the board chair, as has been pitched?
I don't see the U.S. in general as a neutral mediator in general. I think the U.S. will always take Israel's side and take care of Israeli interests first. So, like I said, I hope something good comes out of all of this. I mean, we've made it this far. And I hope for the reconstruction of Gaza to happen very soon. But there will have to be immense pressure put on Israel and rein it in because, as I said, all of the things that we have seen so far, it's Israel doing what Israel wants to do without accountability. No journalists are allowed in. They want to open Rafah one way only. No reconstruction is set to start just yet. You've got the eastern part, all of it, they want to take over that part, it seems, from what they are signaling. So all in all, Israel is doing what they want, what is in their interest, and they do not really, And like I said, in terms of the board of peace or some kind of, even if it's a transitional government, if Palestinians are not involved, if they don't work with Palestinians, I don't see how that will in any way provide a better future.
Haim, I know you've been generally quite cynical for the right reasons about this process, and especially knowing the history as well as you do. But if you had the proverbial magic wand somehow at this point to construct this process and the way forward the way you would ideally want, would there be peace? Is there something you would suggest being able to do to bring peace to this process and to the Palestinians and their vision for their future?
Well, I think Jihan has put her finger on it. Basically, if you want to help the Palestinians for a change, which the West has never done until now for over 100 years, if you want to care about the rights of the Palestinians, about the genocide that they have to face, about the ethnic cleansing, if that's what you want, you wouldn't start from here. You wouldn't start with Trump. You wouldn't start with this agreement, and you wouldn't start by avoiding contact with the Palestinians and doing what Israel wants all the time. And you wouldn't start with the Americans. You would start with probably the UN and a group of nations that supports Palestinians also. The Arab nations that are supporting Trump have done nothing for the Palestinians. It is shameful. It is, scandalous. The way that Arab nations, I shouldn't say Arab nations, Arab leaders who are not democratic, who were rejected by the Arab masses in 2011, as we remember, they have joined the camp of subduing and subjecting the Palestinians under a continued colonialism. We wouldn't start from here. We would start with the Palestinians, with those nations that are, for example, like China, that are not involved in the process, and with the UN, and not with Tony Blair, a war criminal. Why don't we start with Francesca Albanese for a change?
Okay.
Because she actually knows about what is happening.
Chaim,
So we wouldn't do that.
I'm going to have to interrupt it there. So unfortunately, we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. So I'd like to thank both of you so much for being with me and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.